Derek Tebow is here. We have 4 members. We also have Alderman Jettie, Alderman Klee, and Alderman Dowd, and Tim Cummings, Acting Administrative Services Director, and Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director.
Okay, I'll declare that we do have a quorum. Also, to let you know some sad news that we did hear from our chairman, Alderman at Large Melvin Warren, that there was a death in his family, so he'll be out this evening due to bereavement leave. And I'm sure I express the wishes of this committee and our condolences to the family, and hope that that our thoughts are with them during this difficult period. Okay, moving on, I will open it up for public comment. Okay, I think we're all set with public comment. And tonight will be a discussion, and we'll take it according to order. And the first item for discussion will be outdoor dining fees, and I would think that would be Mr. Cummings. So, Mr. Cummings, I'll turn
yes,
over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development and Interim Administrative Services Director. And my report tonight's going to be relatively brief, only in that I wanted to share with the committee that we do have legislation being drafted by the legal department. I was hopeful to have it at the last Board of Aldermen committee meeting for it to be referred here this evening, but unfortunately, due to capacity constraints and other demands of the legal office, as you all know, they're very busy this time of year. That was waylaid a little bit, and I'm anticipating a filing at the next Board of Aldermen meeting. With that being said, though, the feedback I've gotten from the downtown merchants and the downtown restaurants has followed suit with my previous comments. There has not been any deviation, and I was pleased to see that this subject continued to be on a public agenda with public comment, where if someone wanted to come out this evening to express their concerns, they would have the ability to do so. With that all being said, I believe the conversation that we had at the last PEDC meeting, we had a good, healthy discussion, which was what helped inform the recommendation by the PEDC committee that is what's being used as the backbone for developing the pending legislation. So. With that being said, Mr. Chairman, I would anticipate being invited back at your next PEDC meeting, where I think the legislation would be before you for a second reading, and I'd be happy to go into further details at that time. Thank you.
Okay. Would you be available for a question, keeping in mind to all the committee members, to get deep into the matter would be putting the cart before the horse. I think we would all prefer to have a rendering from legal first before we get too deep into it. But if, Mr. Cummings, can you be available if there was a question? Okay, any questions by members of the committee? Alderman Karen.
Yes, thank you. If I remember at our last meeting, Director Cummings, we asked you to go back to the restaurants to get an idea of the cost factor that we were discussing per slot. We had set the legislation for like $500, and you were going to go back and see how that worked with these restaurants and small cafes and what have you. Were you able to do that so that we would have some of that information for when the legislation comes in next week?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, you may.
Yes, I have. I haven't reached all of the restaurants, but I have reached out to a good number of them, and told them in anticipation of the legislation what I thought was coming, and they all thought that that was appropriate or reasonable.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Further questions? Alderman Clemmons.
No, just a quick comment. I actually I spoke to 3 different restaurant owners since then, and I've also heard from another one unsolicited. So the $500 on all of them have told me that that's going to hit the mark. the $500 per space. So I think we're on the right track.
Okay, further questions, members
Yeah.
of the board?
I ran into someone as well, and the cost they gave me was quite high, that they were willing to pay. So my feeling was that we started at, a nice level, and then it's something that future boards could to look at and anticipate making those changes without hurting some of the smaller restaurants that might not get the numbers of tables that, some of the others would. So, that's why I asked, otherwise we can't make a good decision if we don't have those kind of comments, so, thank you.
Alderman Dow.
Yeah, just another comment, it has nothing to do with the cost, per se. I think a lot of people don't like the esteemed color that we spent hours deciding on for the barriers, nor do they like the Jersey barriers that take up half the street. There are much stronger, better barriers available. Can we just do a little research and find out alternatives without going into discussion on the color or anything else?
Mr. Chair, to put it
Yes.
succinctly, I'd be happy offline to do a little research and get back to you.
I think that's a fair answer. I think when we picked the Jersey barriers, our paramount was the safety in mind. And I think with those guaranteed, they're good enough for the highway, it'll be good enough for Main Street, Further questions? Alderman Jettie.
So, I don't want to, I was here for the last meeting and I heard, how the committee, the thoughts expressed by the committee, and so I know where the committee is going, but I feel obligated to tell you how I feel. I feel that we're missing an opportunity. We talked about, at least I talked about last time, about how Portsmouth and Concord both charge a fee per square foot of dining area on the sidewalk. So this is in addition, the $500 that we talked about was for the street space that would be blocked off by the barrier. But the restaurants are, using the sidewalk as well. And, that is a benefit to them. And, Portsmouth charges $10 a square foot for that space. Concord charges $3 a square foot. And I know that Alderman Clemmons at the last meeting pointed out that, in his opinion, Portsmouth was a destination area that, restaurants, had more business coming to them, and that Concord had, the State House, and they've got insurance companies and other businesses that provide a good lunchtime crowd. And I don't know if that's, I understand, what he's saying about that, and I'm not disputing it. I just don't know that it's accurate. And I don't, I certainly am not, don't consider myself qualified to say, what would be an appropriate number. Is Nashua, less attractive to restaurants than, Portsmouth and Concord? I think we're selling Nashua short. When I did look at rental rates for commercial space and office space, and I didn't see that the rates that are being charged in Nashua evidence a lack of demand. If Concord, for example, was that more attractive a destination for people, which would attract more diners, you would think that would be reflected in the rental rates. This is just my amateur opinion, I grant you. But the rates in Nashua are the same, if not more, than the Concord rates. So, and, you know, you know, the taxpayers are, you know, spending the better part of $25 million to build a new performing arts center, which we're all looking forward to. And I think the restaurants are looking forward to that opening up. And we've been talking about how that performing arts center is going to attract a lot of people to Nashua. So I think that sidewalk space, you know, is something that would be very attractive to restaurants. And, you know, if we charged something similar to, you know, Concord, $3 a square foot, you know, I mean, you know, that's for the season. That, you know, how many tables do you have to, you know, sell meals at to make that up? I just wanted to let the committee know that I think that that's something that we ought to explore more and not dismiss it, you know, so readily. So thank you.
Well, I would like to say, Alderman Jettie, that Rome wasn't built in a day, and this is a very fluid type of program that we're getting into. And it doesn't mean, and I think in the pending legislation, it is against state law for one legislative body to handcuff future legislation. And that doesn't mean that other people that may be sitting in these very same chairs in the future wouldn't be able to have more adjustment to the rate. But I think, to use the phrase basically Alderman Karen said, that you got to start off somewhere, and this seemed to be the fair start-off price. Doesn't mean we're frozen in perpetuality with it. It just means for now, and it could come out. Future bodies may make that decision. They may not. God only knows what future legislative body could do here. So keep that in mind. Any other further questions? Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate what Alderman Jettie brings, because I do think it's good to look at other places, because, I mean, we don't have all the best ideas, you know. You got to look at other places, whether they're in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, you know, other places in New Hampshire. But I think we'll have a couple of opportunities to debate this. One, we'll have the legislation in this committee, or I think it's in this committee, and we'll have a chance to debate that kind of stuff and, you know, add amendments if necessary. And then we'll have it at the Board of Aldermen. So I think we can talk about it again there. I think today was just Tim giving us an update, I think, really.
Okay, further questions? Seeing none, Director Cummings, I thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome to stay.
Yeah, I'll stay. Yep.
Very good. I think Mr. Sullivan would be happy to have your expertise too, as well. So, at this particular time, we're going to close the discussion on outdoor dining fees and open the discussion on rezoning for Amherst Street. And who'll be making that presentation will be Mr. Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director. So I will now turn it over to Mr. Sullivan, if you'd be so kind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I would consider this a follow-up discussion to the presentation that I made 2 PEDC meetings ago. I think I gave approximately 70 minutes of presentation, so I won't go into great detail about the background for the recommendation that I am putting before you this evening. Similar to the outdoor dining legislation, the next step for the recommendation that I'll describe in just a few minutes is the actual drafting of legislation to extend what we refer to as the mixed-use overlay zone along a portion of the Amherst Street corridor. And I've provided a few graphics to review, but I'm actually going to suggest flipping to the very colorful graphic on the second page titled Draft Mixed-Use Overlay Zone Extension Zoning. And to give you a sense of what we're talking about doing here, really to encourage a more flexible zoning district along the Amherst Street corridor, The area in blue circled within sort of the core of the Amherst Street corridor there, the line running across diagonally on the page, is the area in which we would suggest extending the mixed-use overlay zoning district. And for the few folks who were not at the presentation 2 months ago, the mixed-use overlay district is one of the most flexible in the city of Nashua and really allows the planning board to encourage a variety of uses, including, perhaps most importantly, in the context of our discussion a few months ago, residential uses. As I mentioned a few months ago, we have seen increased interest from the development community along Amherst Street corridor. And certainly within the Imagine Nashua Master Plan, that is a use typology that was considered and suggested to be installed along that area. One other point that I do want to make as well as just a reminder is that the mixed-use overlay zone also gives the planning board increased authority to execute some of the concepts that were in the master plan, including the idea of moving buildings closer to the street, introducing more traffic calming along the corridor, and encouraging some of the development patterns that have produced some very nice campus-style development along the Amherst Street corridor. So again, my recommendation is to move forward with a modest modification to zoning. All of the area within the blue on that second page and sort of the core would be changed to mixed-use overlay zone, and it would overlay the underlying zoning. And this would allow the planning board increased flexibility in what development form is actually carried out on those parcels. I did include a third page here where you see the Amherst Street corridor labeled. This is actually just a snippet from a map that is actually in the process of being released as part of the city's land use code RFP that's going out in the coming week. And the reason that I included this, and you'll see the black outline of some semblance of the Amherst Street corridor, is this is actually an area, as I discussed, that we are targeting in the RFP for an introduction of what we refer to as a form-based code. Focus much more on the form of development than the actual uses that will be permitted along the corridor. So I included that just to say that while we can actively work on submitting this legislation to make a small mixed-use overlay modification, we are working on the longer-term solution, which is installing a form-based code along the extent of the corridor to more comprehensively address this issue. I'm happy to take any questions that the chair and committee might have, but the next step is, again, drafting some legislation and putting it through the normal obligatory planning board PEDC hearing process, hopefully to incentivize some redevelopment and consideration from developers of these parcels along the corridor.
Okay, we'll get to committee members first. Any committee member? Alderman Dow.
Well, Amherst Street, of course, falls in my ward. And also being chair of the ZBA for a long time, we've had many, many issues with Amherst Street zoning. And the unfair, if you will, taxation of companies because of the zoning. It was, HB is highway business, right?
Correct.
Which is taxed much higher than the lots behind it. And when we gave permission for a company like Best Ford to operate, we were charging them 2 tax rates for their property. I don't know where that stands today, but that was always an issue. So the first 200 feet along the street was being taxed in the HB zone, even if it was part of a bigger property, which I don't know how that's all flushed out, but I think at the time we said that wasn't fair. And if we were granting the rights for, say, a big lot, that it all should be taxed at the same rate, under the same use, because they weren't using it for HB. Now, having said that, aren't there other overlays already in this which aren't shown on this map?
So, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, you may.
There are not. The one overlay that exists along the corridor is, and if we refer again to this colored graphic map right here, if you look to the south of the corridor where it symbolizes PIMU, that's Park Industrial Mixed Use. That section of the corridor already has an overlay zone.
Yes, that's
on
what I
top.
was referring
Yes, I'm
to.
sorry. So Alderman Dowd, that is overlaid. The remainder of the corridor, though, it has only underlying zoning, which is general business, highway business, or park industrial in nature.
So in this overlay, is any residential allowed? Shouldn't the overlay be much bigger and go from the properties abutting the airport all the way out to Amherst Street?
So
I know some of it already exists and probably isn't going to change, but if it did change, are we gonna get the same kind of a zoning issue? Because the overlay is only it. I can see an attorney coming back and saying, hey, you cherry-picked zones for this overlay and you excluded ours, but I wanna use it for a different thing now, and you're not allowing it. So could we make the overlay bigger? And just cover the entire Amherst Street from one zone to the.
we certainly could. One of the concerns that I expressed at the prior meeting is that we do need to be somewhat sensitive, at least, particularly on I'll speak to the western side of the corridor first. We are losing land within the city that is currently zoned to prioritize industrial and manufacturing uses. And while the need for those businesses may have diminished over time, there is a need to protect some level of pure warehousing industrial usage. And so I am hesitant to extend an overlay over those properties particularly, because naturally the market at this point in time may demand residential. And so I think there's a need to protect some of those industrial job contributing uses along the corridor. And so Alderman Dowd, I have been hesitant to suggest extending the mixed use in that direction.
Yeah.
If I could just speak quickly to the eastern side of the corridor. This is certainly something that we had discussed internally as you look at sort of the GB zoned area, as you look at this map right here. This is a very well-defined character, and we've had very limited interest in redevelopment of those areas. And because we expect that this zoning will only be in place for about a year and a half of time, frankly, I just didn't introduce the idea of extending the mixed use over those properties because I did not feel there was a lot of redevelopment potential in this year and a half gap between the existing code and the new code.
So follow up. The original issue was years ago, all the lots along Amherst Street on both sides were all industrial business. And then we'd sell it to them for industrial business, and then we'd tax them on the first 200 feet for general business because they said that it could be used for general business and we charge it the higher tax rate. Well, it wasn't zoned that way. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. So the first 200 feet along Amherst Street at the time was thought that if we're gonna tax it as general business, it all should be zoned general business or highway business. And the lots behind it, industrial. So, and that would have cleaned it up 20 years ago. And now we got a mishmash, so we just need to clean up the.
And I would just, Mr. Chair, if I may, to add to the complexity, there are very little material there's very little material difference between the highway business and the general business zoning district. There are a few uses that are differentiated between the two, but the outcomes are not drastically different. And so there's an underlying need to consolidate these zoning districts. That will be occurring much more clearly through the recodification effort, but this interim extension of the mixed use overlay, I would argue, gives the development community more clear direction and cleans up some of that mishmash, as you referred to it, Alderman Dowd, that exists along the corridor right now.
So to follow up, this overlay would allow a general business to operate up in the first 200 feet.
It would allow the planning board the authority to permit really any number of uses in the portions of the lot that are being rezoned to MU, provided that they felt it was appropriate in the context of the master plan and the overall development scheme of the corridor.
Without a variance or without a special exception?
That is correct.
Okay.
Very good, all set, Alderman Dowd?
Now,
Alderman Clemmons?
Yes, thank you. So I wanna just focus attention where the lots are at the end of this towards, Round Pond.
Yep. Yep.
I noticed that the overlay basically stops at Round Pond and doesn't go beyond it or doesn't incorporate it, and I'm wondering what the reason is for that.
Yeah. So a couple responses. One, and I think I may have expressed this at the prior meeting, so I apologize if I'm being redundant, but one of the things that we looked at is the development or the redevelopment likelihood in this gap period of the parcels that we were considering rezoning. And to your question, Alderman Clemens, I don't believe that there's a high likelihood of the commercial area and the warehousing and the industrial uses on that western side of Round Pond to be redeveloped in this interim period. But perhaps more simply, Round Pond is a simple break in the zoning. And so I had drawn the line to stop at Round Pond, not anticipating that redevelopment to the west. Frankly, the overlay could be extended to the west. I would argue we just wouldn't see results from it because those uses are so well established and we haven't seen interest from the development community in actually introducing residential or some of the other uses in the ordinance. But that's not to say that it doesn't exist, it's simply that we haven't seen inquiries to date.
If I could,
Follow up.
well, the pond is an asset, right? Because basically, it's, I don't know if you've ever been over there in the wintertime, but a lot of people use it, you know, and a lot of people go fishing there in the summer and stuff like that. So, the idea that there might be some kind of you know, maybe not from the people that own it now, but sometime in the future, to do something different over there, I think would be a good opportunity. So I guess my thought is, you know, rather than having the ugly warehouses that are back there now, if they could be developed into something else, that would be a good thing, you know. It's just my personal opinion and preference, because I think incorporating the pond into a mixed-use zone to everything around it, I think would be in our best interest. Even if we don't see anything from it today, if we saw something from it 10, 15 years from now, I think we would all be better off for it. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but, you know, it's something where I would like to see that incorporated into something greater.
I do not have any objection to doing the area immediately around Round Pond. I do think it's a unique asset, having seen skating there for many, many years and skated there for many, many years. I think the worst case scenario, we don't see results. We actually have, as part of one of the properties in this area, I won't speak to exactly which one, we have seen some interest in actually doing residential, property that's changed hands multiple times. So I don't think it's a liability to introduce the same overlay around the pond. I think we can just open the door and I don't see any objection to it.
So, I mean, sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I could, so if you're introducing legislation, I think that would be great to extend this up around the pond and kind of end it on those parcels out off the other side.
Alderman Jettie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, so first of all, Round Pond, that's private property, is it not? So anybody skating there is a trespasser.
No, not on
It's
the,
not, the pond itself is not private property, as far as I understand it.
Okay.
The land around is private property. Perhaps I may have trespassed in my past too, but the pond itself is not private property, as far as I understand it.
To help you out, Alderman Jettie, most waterways are controlled by the state of New Hampshire.
But you can't get to the water.
That may occur.
you can from Amherst Street.
From Amherst Street,
You can? Okay.
City Brook.
But I have other questions.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. So I'm concerned about, you know, right now, we're dealing, as you well know, with an overlay district in Ward 5. Where the planning board is, in accordance with the ordinance that created that overlay district, the planning board has the ability to allow non-permitted uses, if it meets the 5 standards that typically apply to the zoning board of adjustment granting variances. And that is a source of much discussion, litigation. The Supreme Court keeps changing and the legislature keeps changing, what the 5 criteria are, what constitutes a hardship is difficult to pinpoint and pin down. So in this overlay district, what standards would the planning board be subject to in order to vary from the main use of the property of the zone?
It's a great question.
Well, Mr. Sullivan, probably would expedite, instead of looking to me, you do have my permission.
Okay.
I'll recognize people to speak in order, but at that point, if one of the members of the committee have a direct question to Mr. Sullivan, I'll let it go through to expedite the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Jay, it's an excellent question. I'll start by saying that the matter you're referring to and the overlay zone you're referring to is extremely unique. In fact, I've never seen one like it in my experience, and that is that, yes, it gives flexibility to applications within, and so to be clear, everyone, I'm not talking about what we're proposing here, but the situation you're referring to, I've never seen a situation where the planning board is granted the authority to use the variance criteria. That is extremely unique. The overlay that's being proposed here uses a different standard, not tied to many years of litigation and consternation. And it is instead what we refer to as a site plan suitability report. And so for every development that happens in the mixed use overlay zone, an applicant is required to, if they are, not just if they're wavering from the standards, but for any proposal, they have to write what's referred to as a site plan suitability report that presents their proposal and compares it to the underlying character and vision for the zone. And it also analyzes a set of approximately 8 criteria that the planning board must weigh when approving or disapproving an application. It is not a variance test, so there's not the same level of, or lack of clarity around hardship that the boards struggle with. Instead, there, I would say, subjective but very clear discussions of diminution of property value, health, safety, and welfare impact, compatibility with the master plan, compatibility with the vision statement of the master plan, traffic, infrastructure adequacy, very clear, almost special exception-esque criteria that the planning board uses, not the variance criteria. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go Alderman Clay, then Alderman Theobald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarification for me, the mixed use means that it could be any of these type of things. It could be residence, it could be what we refer to here as GB or HB or any of those type of things, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so having said that, I mean, I'd love to see residential go in behind Round Pond. That would be really a lovely thing, get rid of those warehouses and so on. But putting that aside, I would have some issue if we tried to move the zoning into where we're looking at from this colorful one into that R9, R18, or RC, the residential. And the reason I say that is I think it was something that you mentioned, kind of keeping it pure. They're already there. They already have those businesses in front of them, so it's nothing that would be new. But I would fear that any little space or pocket, someone would try to put in an asphalt plant or something of that nature, and we really don't want to see, and then be here and yelling, you know, upsetting the residents that are already there. So I have no problem with your plan. I kind of like the the inclusion, as Alderman Clemmons said, kind of bringing it down forward so that you could allow for residents into that area. But I would hate to see it widen into the other side. I think you referred to it as the westerly side where where the residential areas are, the R9s and so on. It's just my opinion, but, and I'm not on this committee, but if it comes to the board, I will object if that got widened. So, thank you.
Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm gonna, agree with Alderman Clemmons. I think we could extend it just at the Round Pond point, but I also agree with Alderman Clee not to cut into those apartments and condos that are there. Round Pond, I think it used to be owned by International Paper Box 50 years ago or something, or at least the area around it. I went fishing there plenty, so I think it's a great asset. I think Alderman Clemmons wants to turn it into like a, water park or something, some kind of resort where you can go and spend some time catching perch and sunfish. But I think it's a good idea to try to utilize something that is an asset to at least that part of the city. But one thing you keep mentioning is interim. So in a year or so, we're gonna look to do that whole plan that you and Sam Durfee have talked about. And so how does the interim affect this? So does what we have here, what you're gonna propose, you said would be there for about a year and a half, and then we're gonna go forward with something else. So at that point, things are going to change and impact this anyway, correct? So this is kind of just a temporary change to this while you're working on that. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I think it's also a change that's intended to recognize immediate housing needs that we have in the community and a possible compatibility of that use along the corridor. But yes, it's very much perhaps I'll regret using this language, it's a Band-Aid until we have time to fully, install what we'd like to along the corridor. But it's a Band-Aid that doesn't displace existing businesses. It really just opens the door for a conversation with the development community about how what they might want to do intersects with our master plan that we currently have in place.
And I support it, so thank you.
Alderman Dow.
Yeah, just a couple things. One, the immediate, at the end of that blue line, that's where Michael Buckley currently has that property under development, which would be HB. On the other side of Round Pond, the next space is CVS, HB. Next door to that is Longhorn Steakhouse, HB. And then you've got the Target, which I assume is that whole lot. What's just beyond Target? Just beyond Target is a gas station, which looks like it's in Park Industrial. The Shell station. On the other side, there's a commercial business that's also in Park Industrial, but I'm not sure how that's probably fits. And then I'm not sure what the big red area under general business beyond that is.
So there are two restaurant uses in the Park Industrial adjacent to the gas station near the Shell. There are two restaurant uses there.
There's that Mexican restaurant.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. And then when we move over towards the Market Basket Plaza, that's how I'll refer to it, that's obviously zone general business as well. But Alderman Dowd, you're absolutely correct. The 420 Amherst Street, which is the Buckley site you referred to, and the Target site are both in the general business zone.
Okay.
And then obviously the rear portion of the yellow section with the restaurants and gas station, that is a distribution area that you probably all know.
The other only question I have is if you come across where the fire just was on Amherst Street, that road, there's residential properties there, but they're in the PI mixed use.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to assume that even though there are residents there, if they ever sold them, that Park Industrial uses could go in there because it's, even though it's.
That is correct.
So, is there any interest in changing that zoning to residential? Or should that be part of the mixed use where it could be residential?
So Alderman Dowd, could I ask for clarification on where exactly you're referring to? Because I think I have an answer, but I want to make sure.
Okay, if you come across See that right in the middle is a big HB on both sides of the street?
Yep.
And you come across there, there's a gas station on the eastern corner, and then it's housing. Well, there's a bank in the corner.
The 7-Eleven and a Bank of America,
Yeah, and then there's housing behind it, but it's all in, according to this, park industrial mixed use.
Yeah. I'll answer your question this way, Alderman Dowd. We certainly could adjust the underlying zoning there to be residential in nature. I know that this mixed-use overlay zone that exists here was done several years ago in a very similar effort to what I'm suggesting this evening. I believe potentially by the late Jerry Pruner even may have suggested this zoning. I'm not sure that change is necessary though. The one exception I would offer is that in the event that some large developer came forward and proposed a park industrial use, I think it would be critical for the planning board in reviewing that proposal to look at the surrounding residential character that exists and make an analysis or levy an analysis on that proposal based on the character that surrounds it. And so what I'm really getting at is that while it is PI from an underlying perspective, because that MU exists, the planning board is asked to look at the surrounding uses and decide whether the proposed use is allowed based on what it sees in the ground. And so it could protect those residential property owners.
I only brought that up because of Alderman Clee's concern about not extending it into residential.
Sure.
It's already in residential under a different mixed use.
Yep.
But it's always been confusing to the zoning board on the properties along the street because there's so many exceptions and variations, you know, that it confuses the heck out of all the people that sit on that board going back 20 years.
And when you have 450 uses, sometimes it doesn't make sense why someone who retails, vinyl records can't open next to somebody who retails some other clothing use or something like that. Our use table is extremely specific. And so part of the benefit of introducing mixed use overlay is that it takes really that use table completely away and puts it in the planning board hands. Now there are risks there, of course, but I would suggest that the flexibility far outweighs the risks.
So my last question, Alderman O'Brien, is you have your protege doing the entire rezoning for the entire city.
Protege. Interesting.
Your new planning.
Yes,
manager.
yes.
And how might that be impacted in this zone?
It's a great question, Alderman Dowd. What I think you're asking is what the outcome might be for the new zoning of this area. And the easy answer is for me to say, I don't know. We haven't necessarily done the level of public engagement and conversation with this board amongst others to get to that outcome. What I can say is that we are moving towards something that does not strictly govern what types of uses occur on the properties, but instead provides a very clear visual set of guidance materials to the development community about what we want to see from a built form perspective along the corridor. And so again, we refer to this as a form-based code, but really it's a set of zoning criteria that are intended to produce a certain look and feel rather than a specific set of uses. So that's where I think we're headed along this corridor. It's where I think we're headed in the downtown core. It's where I think we're headed in select other areas around the city where there is a fairly clear and concise community vision. And I think that it's the mixed use overlay that sort of set some precedent for us in this way. This has worked relatively well, and we've taken some of the constraints away from what uses are actually being implemented. And I think moving forward with that in mind is how we're going to look at the Amherst Street corridor.
Yeah, I think that mixed use zone was Sarah, what she was here.
Yep.
Okay, Alderman Clegg.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Chairman. And to speak to something that Alderman Dowd had mentioned. As a person who lived in Canongate in your ward for 16 years, when I first moved there, there was a soccer field there, but I knew that there could be businesses and so on. And to see it kind of be built around us, a vacuum type company went there, that little mini mall went there, the hotel went there, and so on. So to live in a residence and watch this happening, we were at the planning board a lot, trying to fight some of these things that were coming in here. The mortgage company was one of them, when Friendly's left. So what I'm trying to say is, and I do agree with you that on the opposite side, there's the PIMU. That's kind of already existing and so on. And what was just trying to say is let's not infiltrate. These people already have businesses in front of them. All those communities that are back there already have businesses. I just didn't want a business to find a little niche spot that they could get in there and develop and hurt that business. All along Amherst Street, in the back, are the residences. So I just didn't want it to overdevelop, meaning they could kind of creep in, do some kind of creeping, especially considering we need so much residents. But I do agree with you, you're right, the PIMU was on the opposite side of it. So, but that's also closer to the airport. I think right next to that 7-Eleven, as you pointed out, there's some residents in that area and so on. And they weren't always there. They kind of popped up at one day too, so. But I just like to try to keep that other side pristine. I think your constituents would appreciate that. So, thank you.
All right, I would just like to say as chair, I heard a lot about the wishes of residential and, I want to clearly say that I'm not against with this plan because this is going to give us an idea what to do. But when you start mentioning residential, means you need a GOV to buy residential. And that's a job. And the thing is, not everybody's got to work on Northeastern Boulevard. So why some of these industrial type buildings have emerged into the Nashua Airport, which is potentially could happen. You shake your head, I'm not going to put money on it, because God only knows what the future could hold. But I know the door could be shut and bolted tight if that is the wishes of the committee. But again, too, is to shut out completely any type of industry or potential for industry is you're also eliminating jobs. And therefore, you're not going to sell real estate. So just keep in mind, in my opinion, that there's a fine line. I'm for increasing the residential, but also increasing, unless you want a bedroom type of community where people are going to have to travel out of Nashua to be gainfully employed. So we're going to need some industrial type of buildings still to this degree so that people can have that JOB and afford the new residential that will be coming. So it needs to be a delicate hand-in-hand matter, and it's beyond the meeting tonight, but I just want to caution to say that,
So, you were
Alderman
saying,
Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you 100%. I just don't think that the place for that is around a nice pond. And that was kind of the point that I was trying to make, which is let's try to make, I agree with you, there's a time and a place for that. Why it was ever put there or why that pond was, we ever said to heck with it and did that, I don't know. I wasn't around when it happened. Well, maybe I was, but I certainly wasn't here in this
Neither was I.
workshop
It
when it
doesn't mean
happened.
in the past.
But
That's right.
I'm just saying, let's encourage something different where we can, but not, and do that with the mixed use, because I think if the businesses that are there, obviously, if they stay, whatever. Somebody wants to move in, do that, they don't want to move, fine.
Right.
But if somebody has a vision and wants to come in and do something different, then it gives them the idea to do that. So
My
that
comments
was my
were
only-
more meant to Capitol Street and,
And that-
within that area, State
No,
Street,
exactly.
Capitol. which is kind of a little bit removed from Round Pond. But keep in mind, on the beautiful banks of Round Pond is Norcross Chemical, so keep that in mind as well.
That's my point.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, I just had a clarification with your question. You said moving towards the airport. There are a couple of criteria that keep you in check going from Amherst Street towards the airport. One is the railroad tracks and the people that own the railroad tracks. It might as well be a Berlin Wall there. They won't allow you to cross onto the airport property over their tracks, number one. Number two, the airport has clear zones. They go up at an angle on the sides and the ends of the airport. You can't build in them. The FAA won't allow it. So it's just certain things that keep you from having buildings, especially of any size, close to the airport.
Well, keep in mind, Alderman Down, in our changing world, Pan-Man does not exist with the railroad anymore. What you talk is ancient history. There's a new game with railroad, yeah, right, Director Cummings?
They haven't
That
seen
may
it.
be a little bit more liberal and workable.
I can only speak to the past, not the future.
True. No, and well stated, and well stated. But with the new owners of the railroad, I mean, I wouldn't venture to guess how they particularly feel. And I think at this level, we're talking hypothetically. I just put it in the, something to chew on as well. I true wish for more better residential opportunities, but at the same time, we gotta have facilities where our people can be gainfully employed. Not everybody wants to work at McDonald's. Nothing wrong with working at McDonald's, but I'm sure people want to work in better type of careers, and that's, where are those areas? And we can't lose them all, is what I'm just basically, in caution, saying. Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, I thank you two gentlemen. This was a little bit more informative than I thought. I thought it was very good. I thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, moving on, I think we could relatively go through this quick. Communications,
There is none.
unfinished business,
None.
petitions,
None.
new business resolutions,
None.
new business ordinances.
None.
Anything tabled in committee?
Nope.
General discussion. I thank you all. Public comment? Nobody's here for public comment. Remarks by Alderman? Yes, Alderman Terrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, since we're here and we just heard about it in the last couple of days, I want to give my thoughts and to Alderman Moran and Lisa and their family and their kids. I consider them friends, and it's never easy to lose someone close. And I think, in this day and age where there's so much hate, we have to realize that we're all not going to be here, in the future at some point, and to try to treat each other better while we're here, because you never know when stuff like that can happen. So my heart and my prayers go out to them, and two other things real quick. Veterans Day Parade was great. I thought it went off. The weather was beautiful. Nashua came out. We saw a lot of people on the sidelines. It was. I thought it was a really good expression to our veterans in Nashua, and so I thank that. And last, I went to an event on, I think it was Saturday with some people that were in here. It's the Welcoming City. We got the certificate for being a welcoming city. Again, thought it was a great event. The mayor spoke. The food was catered by Soul Sisters, and it was very good. But one thing I'm hearing about is people thinking that this is turning us into a sanctuary city, and that's not what this is about. It's not even close to what it's about. Nobody's mentioned that. And I see that out there a lot, and I see that rumor, and it's just not. It's a good thing. We should be happy about that. We've been a welcoming city. It's not something new. It's not just because we got a certificate doesn't mean that all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of people are going to be flowing into the city. They can't afford it. And there's no place to our directors here are going to open up the places so we can have plenty of places to live. But, you know, people are thinking that wrong. It's a good thing, and we should be proud and put that on a plaque, just like all the other awards we've gotten recently in the city. So I just wanted to say that, and I know this isn't the biggest area, you know, it's a smaller meeting, but I just wanted that to go out.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Karen, do you have anything to say? Alderman Dowd? Alderman Clemmons? Alderman Jettie? Alderman Clee? Okay, there is just one brief house cleaning item that, on your packet here. I could donate mine, but do you send this electronic to, Ms. Graham?
I do, yes.
Okay, for the public record, then I'll keep my copy. And could you make sure that I'm giving you the formal request that it be submitted to Ms. Graham for the public record.
It's in her inbox.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no other items before the board, no other comments, Alderman Theobald, do you have a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn.
Okay, there is a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? A motion carries, and we'll call the meeting adjourned at 7:56 PM. Thank you all for coming.